The banging started just before dawn. Not the wind, not the usual creak of the barn roof, but something desperate. Then came the sound that stopped Samuel in his tracks, a sharp, high-pitched whine, rising like a cry smothered by cold. He had just lit the stove in the kitchen, his hand still stiff with the early October frost, when he heard it again, longer this time, edged with panic. He moved fast, boot soles scuffing over the worn hardwood floor, heart rising with a tension he couldn't explain. He unlatched the door. There, slumped against the threshold, was a mother dog, ribs like slats, eyes hollow with exhaustion, her fur matted with dirt and blood, and trailing behind her like shadows clinging to the hem of a ghost were 3 tiny puppies, barely moving, pressed close together in a heap of trembling fur. The mother gave one last guttural whine, blinked up at him with a strange pleading in her eyes, then collapsed. Samuel staggered back a half step, stunned. "What the hell happened to you?" he murmured, crouching down. He reached out slowly. The dog was still breathing, shallow, but there, her sides quivered, the movement weak and unsteady. Her paws were cracked, one of them swollen, and her body smelled of mud, brambles, and the sour sting of infection. One pup tried to lift its head but couldn't. The others didn't move at all. Samuel glanced across the yard. The horizon was just beginning to pale behind the cornfields, but there was no sign of anyone. No car, no bike, not even a trail of tracks in the frost. Just silence. And now this wreck of a mother half dead, trusting enough to drag herself across who knows how many miles to reach his door. He didn't hesitate after that. He lifted the limp mother gently, cradling her bony frame against his chest, then gathered the pups into an old feed sack lined with a torn wool blanket. Inside the farmhouse, the stove was throwing out real heat now. He cleared space by the hearth, set the pups down, and laid the mother beside them. Her legs twitched once, then stilled. One of the pups whimpered a thin, dry sound and instinctively pressed itself against her chest. Samuel knelt by the fire, his broad shoulders hunched, watching the flickering light stretch across the dog's fragile body. He had seen animals hurt before, born on this land, raised with it in his blood, but nothing like this, not at his door. Not like she knew where to go. He ran a hand through his thick gray hair and exhaled slowly. "You didn't just wander here," he muttered. "You were trying to find someone." In the stillness, something inside him stirred, not pity exactly, but a kind of reckoning, as if this broken creature had come carrying more than her young, a warning, a message, or maybe just a final plea. Outside, the frost cracked under the first light of day, but Samuel stayed there, motionless, eyes flicking from mother to pup to fire, waiting, watching, wondering who had done this and why this desperate family had chosen him. The answers weren't coming yet, but he felt it deep in his gut. Something was wrong, something far bigger than a stray dog on a cold morning, and it had just begun. The first light had barely crept across the fields when the mother dog began to seize. Samuel was crouched near the stove, feeding her small amounts of warm broth with a spoon when her body jerked violently. Her head rolled back. Her hind legs kicked out once, then stiffened. The pups huddled close, whimpered in unison. One let out a high-pitched squeal that pierced through the stillness like a blade. Samuel dropped the spoon and lunged to steady her. "No, come on, girl, not now," he muttered, wrapping his arms gently around her, trying to hold her still without hurting her more. Her breathing was ragged, rasping like wind through a cracked window, and her eyes rolled wide for a moment before they fluttered shut. And just like that, it stopped. She went limp, her head falling against his arm. Samuel held still, listened. She was still breathing, barely. His throat tightened. He'd seen that kind of fit before. Not in dogs, but in dying livestock, animals poisoned or broken beyond mending. It meant time was running out. He pulled the old rotary phone from the wall and dialed. Not the vet in town. Dr. Avery was kind, but slow, and his hands trembled more than Samuel's these days. No. He called Meredith Hale, the field vet who worked mostly with rescues and had a reputation for getting her hands dirty when no one else would. She answered on the second ring, her voice low and clear even through the static. "I've got a collapsed mother dog," Samuel said. "Brought 3 pups with her. She's in bad shape. Not a stray, not with the way she looked at me. This feels wrong." Meredith didn't ask him to explain. She said she'd be there in 20 minutes. By the time her dusty SUV rattled down the drive, the sun had crested the tree line and was bleeding gold across the frost. Samuel met her at the porch, gave a brief nod, and led her inside. She was young, maybe late 30s, hair pulled back in a practical knot, her jacket worn and stained from years of fieldwork. She said nothing as she knelt by the dog, only pressed her fingers beneath the thin neck, then moved to check the pups one by one. The mother dog stirred, eyelids fluttering, and let out a low sound. Not pain, not warning, relief. "She made it all the way here?" Meredith asked softly. "Came right to my door. Collapsed soon as I opened it." Meredith glanced up, her brows pulled together slightly. Not surprise, recognition. "I've seen her before," she said, "about 6 weeks ago. She was part of a hoarding case south of the river. 23 dogs locked in a falling down barn. No food, barely any light. We took the worst ones out. This girl was one of the last we saw, pregnant and hiding under the floorboards. She bolted when we tried to catch her. Disappeared into the woods. We figured she wouldn't last long. Samuel looked at the mother dog again, ribs like knives, belly deflated, yet somehow still alive. She lasted, he murmured, and found her way here, Meredith added. That detail hung heavy in the air. Her eyes scanned the room, then settled back on Samuel. You've got livestock, don't you? He nodded slowly. Cattle, mostly. She didn't speak right away, just moved her hands down the dog's spine, careful and practiced. I think she was coming back for help, she said at last. Not just shelter. Somewhere safe. Somewhere she remembered. Samuel frowned. You think she's been here before? No, but dogs remember kindness smells, even one good moment, in a storm of bad. Maybe she caught your scent once. Maybe you helped another dog and she saw it. Somehow, she knew. Samuel stood there, the weight of that quiet truth settling in. He couldn't recall a moment, not exactly, but he'd always fed strays when they came around, tossed them bones, left the barn doors open in winter storms. Maybe one of them had carried his scent into the trees. Maybe this broken mother had followed that faint trail across miles of dark forest and frost. Meredith leaned back, pulling her stethoscope from her bag. The bad news is she's in septic shock. She needs fluids, antibiotics, a warm, stable space to rest for at least a week. No shelter around here can handle that. The city ones are overcrowded. I can try to stabilize her, but I'll do it, Samuel said before she could finish. Whatever she needs. Meredith studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. All right. They worked through the morning. Samuel turned the spare bedroom into a makeshift recovery room, brought in heat lamps and old quilts. Meredith cleaned the wounds on the mother dog's paws, started her on fluids, injected a cocktail of antibiotics with steady hands. The pups, weak but alive, latched to a bottle and fed without resistance. It was slow work, careful work, but something about it steadied Samuel's pulse. Later, as Meredith packed up her supplies, she paused by the door. She didn't just survive out there, she said. She protected them, fed them, kept moving, all for them. She's stronger than she looks. She's more than that. Meredith hesitated, then added, she's a fighter. But I'd keep an eye out, Samuel. If she came from that hoarding site, she might not be the only one still running. And if someone let that many dogs rot in a barn, someone out there might not like that one of them made it out alive. Samuel's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked toward the window, toward the distant woods beyond the field, still dark at their edges. He didn't say anything, but he knew, deep down, the peace of this place, the quiet, steady rhythm of the land, had been disturbed. Something had found its way to his doorstep, something that hadn't given up even when everything in its world had told it to. And somewhere out there, something or someone might be looking to take it back. Samuel locked the front door that night, first time in 20 years. The night passed quietly, too quietly for Samuel's liking. Even the owls kept to themselves, and the wind, which usually scratched gently at the roof like a familiar visitor, had gone still. Inside the spare bedroom, the low hum of the heat lamps and the steady tick of the old wall clock were the only sounds as he sat in the worn armchair beside the makeshift bed, eyes fixed on the sleeping mother dog. She had stabilized for now. Her breathing had deepened, no longer ragged, and the pups were nestled against her in a fragile tangle of limbs and fur. One twitched in its sleep, another let out a soft squeak that made Samuel's chest tighten all over again. He hadn't slept. Not really, just drifted in and out with the lamp on, boots still laced. Something was eating at him, not fear, exactly, but a knowing, a weight that hadn't settled properly since Meredith left. She'd said the mother dog might not be the only one still out there, and the more he turned that over in his mind, the more he felt it was true. At first light he rose, made coffee, checked the barn, the fence lines, the long dirt drive. Everything looked the same, quiet, normal. But as he approached the mailbox near the edge of the road, he saw something that hadn't been there the day before. A boot print pressed deep into the gravel where the frost had melted, recent, unmistakable. Not his. Wider foot, heavier step. Heading in, not out. Samuel stared at it for a long moment, then turned back toward the house. Coffee forgotten. That wasn't a hiker. It wasn't the vet. Someone had come up his drive, and not just to say hello. Inside the dogs were still sleeping, but he closed the bedroom door anyway. Then he opened the drawer beside the sink and pulled out the old revolver he hadn't touched in years, loaded it slow, quiet, just in case. By mid-morning Meredith was back. She had brought more supplies, vitamins, antiseptic, a second crate, just in case the pups needed to be moved. Samuel told her about the footprint, watched her expression shift from calm to sharp in a blink. That barn we raided, she said. The man who owned it didn't fight the seizure, but something about him felt unfinished. Like he was just waiting for us to leave so he could start over somewhere else. We never found all the dogs. Some were hidden. Some, we think, were taken before we arrived. Samuel clenched his jaw. You think he's looking for her? I think if she escaped with those pups, and they're the last proof of what he was doing, yeah, he might be. The next 2 days passed in a strange rhythm, tending the dogs, walking the property, watching the horizon with unease. The mother dog, now responding to soft whistles and a slow hand, had regained just enough strength to raise her head when Samuel entered the room. He called her Luna, after the crescent-shaped scar above her right eye. She seemed to accept it. Without protest, the pups were thriving in small steps, eyes opening, legs beginning to support their clumsy weight. They stumbled toward Luna now, suckling greedily. Life was rooting itself here again. But the feeling in Samuel's chest wasn't peace. On the third night, it broke. It was just after midnight when the motion light near the barn snapped on. Samuel woke instantly, not from the light, but from Luna's growl, deep, low, not fierce but warning. He moved fast, grabbed the revolver, slipped on his coat and stepped outside. The air was colder than it had been in days, sharp and biting. The light was casting a long shadow across the gravel near the barn, and there, just beyond its edge, was a shape, a man, standing still, watching the house. Samuel lifted the revolver halfway. "You're on private land," he called out, voice even. "Step back to the road." The figure didn't move. I said, "Step back." Still no motion, just silence, thick and unnatural. Then the man took a single step forward, not toward Samuel, but toward the barn, like he wasn't listening, like he didn't care. Samuel raised the gun fully. "I won't ask again." That made the man stop. He stood there for another breath, then slowly raised his hands. Not high, not surrender, just enough to be seen. In the dim light, Samuel could make out a broad, dirt-smeared coat, unshaven face, and eyes that didn't blink. "I'm just looking for something I lost," the man said, voice low and gravelly. "A dog, pregnant, brindle coat, went missing. Some weeks back might have wandered here." "She's not yours," Samuel said. The man tilted his head. "How would you know that?" "Because she walked here on broken legs and collapsed at my door with pups still clinging to her, and she didn't look back once." The silence stretched again, colder now. "She's mine," the man repeated, voice hardening, "and I want her back." Samuel didn't flinch. "You're not getting her." The man took another step forward, just one, and Samuel cocked the hammer back. The click echoed louder than it should have. The stranger stopped again. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "I'll be back," he said quietly. Then he turned and walked into the dark, disappearing beyond the trees like a shadow breaking apart. Samuel stayed there, gun raised, heart pounding, until the light went out again and the cold crept deeper into his sleeves. Inside, Luna hadn't moved, but her eyes were open now, watching the door. She had known he was coming, and Samuel knew he would come again, but next time he wouldn't be asking. By sunrise, the man was gone, but the tension hadn't left with him. Samuel watched the horizon, with narrowed eyes, sipping burnt coffee from the enamel mug he hadn't set down all morning. His knuckles were still white around the handle. The memory of that figure stepping out of the darkness and saying "she's mine" repeated like a ticking clock in the back of his mind. It hadn't been a bluff. There was ownership in the man's tone, not the kind that comes from care, but from possession, the kind that doesn't forget when something's been taken. Inside, Luna slept curled around her pups, but she flinched at sudden sounds. Now the slam of a drawer, the creak of a floorboard. Samuel had seen that kind of fear before, in wounded animals and mistreated men. She wasn't just scared of being found. She was scared of being taken back. Meredith arrived just after 9, sharp and quiet as usual. Samuel didn't waste time. He told her everything. The man, the warning, the way he stood at the edge of the barn like he already knew the place. Her mouth tightened with every word. "That's him," she said flatly. "Harlan Cross, the owner of the hoarding property. We never had enough evidence to press charges. Claimed he was rescuing the strays himself. Had some permits from out of county. Enough to muddy it up. He's been bouncing around the back roads ever since, probably looking for the ones that slip through." Samuel leaned against the counter. "He's not just looking. He wants her back. He won't stop," she said. "Not if he thinks she's proof of what he did, especially if she's bonded to someone else now." Samuel looked over toward the bedroom where Luna's pups had begun to yawn and stretch, blinking open, clouded blue eyes. "He's not getting near her." Meredith hesitated, then reached into her bag. "I brought something." She handed him a small chip, a micro-tracker, no larger than a sunflower seed. "If you'll let me, I can implant this in her. Quietly, if anything happens, if she's taken, we'll know where she is." He gave a short nod. "Do it." The procedure was quick, and Luna barely stirred. When it was done, Meredith knelt beside the dog, brushing her fur gently. "You made it this far," she whispered. "You picked the right porch. We're not letting him take you back." But even as they worked, the feeling in the house began to shift. Samuel felt it. First, not noise, not movement, just a change in the air. He glanced toward the window and saw it. A drone, small, almost silent, floating above the pasture beyond the barn. He was outside before Meredith could stop him, grabbed the rifle from the back wall, sighted it fast, and squeezed the trigger. The drone sparked midair and dropped like a wounded bird into the long grass. When he turned back toward the house, Meredith was standing on the porch, face pale. "You think that was his?" Samuel nodded once. "He's watching." She exhaled sharply. "He's escalating." The rest of the day passed in a slow building unease. Meredith stayed longer than usual, reinforcing the windows, helping Samuel check the locks, and rigging a motion alarm out back with salvaged barn wire. The farmhouse, once open and quiet, began to feel like a bunker. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. The shared urgency between them was enough. That night, after Meredith left, Samuel sat by the fire again, Luna at his feet, the pups bundled close in a lined crate beside her. He wanted to believe that what they'd done was enough, that the man would take the message from the destroyed drone and disappear. But he knew better. Predators don't walk away when they've been denied a prize. They wait, they stalk, and when the time comes, they take. It was after midnight when Luna growled. Again, not loud this time. Not the low rumble of fear, but a tight, sudden sound alert. Samuel sat up. Then he heard it not footsteps, not a voice, a click, soft, metallic, outside the back door. He was already moving, rifle in hand, bare feet silent on the cold floorboards. When he reached the door, he didn't open it, just stood there, pressed against the frame, listening. Another click, closer, followed by a faint shuffle. He motioned to Luna, who had risen now, ears forward, body trembling. The pups stirred, but she didn't look at them. Her eyes were locked on the door, and then came the twist Samuel didn't expect. A whine, not from Luna, another dog, outside. Close. He opened the door with one sudden motion, rifle raised, nothing. Then, movement fast, low. From behind the rain barrel, a dog burst out, smaller, skinnier than Luna, limping badly, its fur streaked with old grease and wounds. But what made Samuel's stomach turn was what followed, a thick rusted chain dragging from its neck, and on the end of it, a tag, freshly engraved, shiny dotted red. Property of H. Samuel stepped back, heart pounding. The dog, clearly once part of Luna's pack, didn't look at him, but ran straight for the house. Samuel didn't stop. It didn't need to. It barreled inside like it had been here before. Like it was running from hell. And maybe it was. He turned back to the dark beyond the tree line, barely visible. Something moved again. A flashlight flicked on, then off. A message. He wasn't just being watched, he was being warned. And now there was more than one life on the line. Morning came heavy and gray, a low sky pressing down on the fields like a lid. Fog curled between the rows of the sleeping corn, muffling the usual sounds of birds and wind. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Samuel stood on the porch, rifle at his side, eyes scanning the edge of the woods where the flashlight had flickered hours earlier. Nothing moved. Now, the trees were still. Inside, the second dog, the one with the chain still dragging from its neck, lay curled beside Luna and her pups. Samuel had cut the rusted metal off in the middle of the night, hands trembling with rage as he worked the bolt cutters through. The dog hadn't made a sound, just leaned into the touch like it had been waiting for that moment its whole life. It was male, younger than Luna, his ribs jutting sharply beneath filthy fur. Samuel named him Ash, after the soot-colored patches on his back. Ash hadn't come by accident. He'd come for her. Samuel knew what it meant. Harlan wasn't just watching anymore. He was sending messages. By mid-morning, Meredith arrived. She didn't knock. She came in quiet, eyes on Ash, then Luna, then Samuel. "We don't have long," she said. "I talked to the county deputy. They'll drive by once in a while, but they can't do much unless there's a crime in progress. No warrant, no history, nothing sticks." "He's escalating," Samuel said. "Yes," she nodded, her voice tight. "And if he comes again, he won't knock. You know that." He did. For a long time, they stood in silence. Then Samuel stepped forward, placed a hand on Luna's head, and looked down at the pups, still small, still blind to everything the world had thrown at them, but alive. "I've seen animals heal before," he said. "I've seen them limp through fences and broken winters, and still trust the hand that reaches out, but I've never seen anything like her. She didn't just survive, she chose to. She made a choice to come here." Meredith met his eyes. "Then we owe her the same." That afternoon, they loaded the dogs into the truck, not out of fear, not exactly, but because it was time. Samuel wasn't going to wait for darkness. He wasn't going to wait for Cross to come knocking with a weapon or worse. He was going to finish this while there was still a chance to shape the ending. The road into town was slow, long and slick from morning drizzle. Meredith followed behind in her SUV, keeping distance but always in sight. The plan wasn't complicated, but it was risky. They weren't running. They were delivering a message of their own. The animal shelter's back gate was locked when they arrived, but the director was waiting. Meredith had called ahead. There, behind chain link and reinforced doors, Luna and her pups and Ash would be safe, anonymous, untraceable, fostered out with other rescues under protected status. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was enough. As Samuel lifted Luna from the crate, her body light in his arms, she turned her head and licked the edge of his wrist. Just once, a quiet goodbye. He didn't speak, not there, not with strangers watching. He just nodded, and she seemed to understand. The pups were already wriggling in the shelter staff's hands, warm and fed and curious. Ash stayed close to Luna until the very last moment, eyes never leaving her. Then, when the door closed behind them, he sat at Samuel's side and watched the world through the chain link fence. ears flicking toward every sound. He wasn't broken anymore, just waiting for what came next. Meredith walked up beside him. "They're safe now," Samuel nodded. "So what about him?" "I filed the complaint. With your report, my records, the drone parts, and Ash's injuries, it's enough to open a case. He'll be watched now. But if he wants a fight, he won't find what he's looking for." Samuel let out a slow breath. Not relief, exactly, but release. They drove back separately. By the time he reached the farm, the fog had cleared and the sun had begun to break through in narrow gold lines across the fields. The house felt hollow without the pups. Quiet, too quiet, but not empty. There was peace in it again. A peace earned. That night, Samuel sat on the porch, eyes toward the tree line. He didn't expect to see Harlan again. Men like him, when they lose control, don't come back with their heads held high. They retreat, lick wounds, look for softer prey. And if Harlan did come again, Samuel was ready. But in the days that followed, nothing happened. No lights, no drones, no prints in the gravel, only birdsong returned. A week later a letter arrived, no return address. Just a single photograph inside Luna curled beside her pups in a foster home, her eyes soft, her body whole again. The smallest pup, the runt, had opened his eyes at last, staring up at the camera with a look Samuel recognized. Hope. He set the photo on the mantel, right next to the brass collar tag he'd kept from Ash's chain. Not as a reminder of cruelty, but of what they'd overcome. And every morning after that, before feeding the cattle or walking the fence, he'd sit with his coffee on the porch and watch the road, not with fear, but with quiet readiness, because sometimes life shows up at your door without warning, broken and barely breathing, and sometimes all it takes to change everything is opening it.